Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming out. I want to take a moment to thank University of Houston, Andrew Davis. I want to thank Roberto Tejada for all of his work. He's here tonight. And Beckham Dossett, thank you very much for all of your assistance. Thank you, UH. It's great to be here. Thank you all for coming. Yes, I am stepping down from Glasstire, and it is very appropriate that I wind down my tour of Texas speaking engagements, which I've been doing this spring here in Houston, my hometown, and where it all began. Before I did Glasstire, I did this print magazine called Canvas. I had finished my MBA, and very serendipitously, as these things happen, I met a publisher who wanted to do a print magazine about art, and I had a degree in literature and a degree in business, and this made perfect sense. My mother was an art dealer when I was growing up in Houston. So I said, sure, I'll start an art magazine with my MBA. This seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And it was this magazine. If anyone has a copy of Canvas magazine, please burn it. It was a terrible magazine. It was no good. But what was really wonderful about working on Canvas, which I started in 1998, was discovering the Texas art scene. We had a Houston issue, and soon we launched a Dallas issue. And what I started doing was traveling between the Texas Triangle, as we call it, the megalopolis. I'm from Houston. Houston is home. I went to Rice for undergrad. But I didn't really know the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex whatsoever. I didn't know San Antonio whatsoever. And so all those museums, all of the artists and spaces in those cities, I was starting to discover and starting to see how each city was very, very distinct with a distinct art community, but also interconnected and cross-pollinating. Artists would go to school in this city and then end up working in this city and vice versa. In 1999, while I was working on Canvas, I made my first trip to West Texas. I had never spent time in West Texas. I'd driven through, but I flew into Amarillo, went south through Canyon, where the Panhandle Plains Museum is, which is wonderful if you've never been, through Lubbock, Midland, Odessa. That little detour to the east is to San Angelo, which has a great museum. And then I trekked out west to El Paso, making the obligatory pilgrimage down to Marfa, of course. And if there are any students in the crowd, old people like to say, and it was so different, but it really was very, very different. Marfa was not the same in 1999. And at this point, I started to get really interested in this idea of all of Texas. And I was doing a lot of driving at the time. We like to say that Beaumont to El Paso is 827 miles, and it's farther than it is from New York City to Chicago, and it's even farther than it is from El Paso to Los Angeles. Yes, when you're in El Paso, you're closer to Los Angeles than you are to Beaumont, much less the East Texas border. It's big, we're big. And that was the whole idea behind, that wasn't the whole idea, but I was doing a lot of driving around Texas and going around this space. I like to tell people when I'm talking about Texas, particularly when I'm not in Texas, that Texas has 6 of the top 20 largest cities in the United States, which is more than California. And so this is a very urban place. And in the Texas Triangle plus El Paso, you have 80% of the population of Texas in these sort of urban areas. And so Texas is very much a microcosm of the rest of the country, where you have these urban centers of population and these wide swaths of rural area. And it is very interesting because it does reflect the rest of the country in that way. And in all of these urban areas, of course, are the big institutions. So this was the idea, not that Texas is big, but this was the whole idea, this imaginary line drawn around this space on the surface of the planet, and what is the idea of it, and what is the ethos of it, and does it have any driving spirit to it, and the people in it. This was the thing that I wanted to capture with a website. So I had to name this thing. People always ask me, where does the name come from? This, of course, is Robert Rauschenberg. Does anybody know where Robert Rauschenberg was from? Port Arthur, obviously, yes, and Janis Joplin. So yes, the name, for those of you who don't know, is an homage to Robert Rauschenberg from Port Arthur. These glass tires were in his retrospective, which was in New York, but also in Houston in 1998. and I'd always remembered them and loved them. I loved the material. I love material art, but the tension in the material versus what it was representing, and this notion of driving and driving great speeds at great clarity encapsulated what this website was going to be all about. So this was the idea, but not just this, it was this. Now, these are the large institutions in Texas. This is just scratching the surface of the Texas art scene. There are commercial galleries and nonprofit spaces and artist-run spaces and flea markets and all kinds of spaces where you can find art in Texas. But linking together this network, this web of art and art communities in Texas was really what it was all about. So, in 2000, I built the original site, and this is the very first homepage of Glasstire. It's not that pretty. That's what the web looked like in those days. As you can see, though, the goal from the beginning was to be statewide. So we have Dallas, we have Austin, we have Houston. There's Stephen Fox responding. It's amazing to think that in our first months of existence, we lost both John Biggers, who's the founder of the TSU art department, and Andy Mann, a seminal conceptual video artist. But this was the original site, and you can see Bill Davenport's tire iron at the top. He was our first regular writer. Pretty quickly, I realized that teal and red on a black background are not much fun to read. So the site pretty quickly became this lovely version. This was a few months into it. This was the first time that a Texas map appeared on the Glasstire website, which is a feature to this day. And as you can see, we got really fancy and created a navigation bar across the top with links to the parts of the site where you could go. And one of those links goes to the message boards. So, does anybody remember the Glasstire message board? Show of hands, does anyone remember? Yeah, oh yes. All right, well, if is anyone in here who doesn't know what message boards were or are, I mean, they're similar to Reddit now, but back in ye olden days, when you couldn't place a comment at the end of an article, you had something called message boards. And this was this sort of awful side place on the site where people said whatever they wanted anonymously. This was before we had coined the word trolling, but this was where the trolling went on. We called it wild and woolly art chat, haha. But it was pretty wild and it was pretty woolly. To this day, we go back and forth on comments and whether or not we are responsible editorially for the comments, whether people read them as a reflection of our editorial, even though we didn't write them. And we've gone back and forth on them. We moderate all the comments on Glasstire today, and it's in our comments policy, we reserve the right to edit comments. So we will go in if there's a nice, good comment, but there's one sentence that's just like, ugh, below the belt. We will cut that sentence out and save that person from themselves and put the comment up on the site because it's a good comment. Anyway, message boards. So the first time I realized that we might be a little bit out of our depth was when we had a comment on these message boards in 2003 where somebody said, satirically I believe, that they had been sexually molested as a child by the director of a major Texas museum. And I thought, ugh. And I called the lawyer who was on our board, and thank goodness we had a lawyer on our board, and she said, oh my God, take it down, take it down, take it down, because that's libel. So, can anyone tell me what the legal definition of libel is? Anyone know the legal definition of libel? All right, no? No one wants to take a guess? I know there's one attorney in here who knows what it is. Well, I'll tell you, the legal definition of libel is that something must be both untrue and damaging. Both untrue and damaging. And libel is written and slander is spoken, but they're the same thing. So, here's an example of libel. Are you ready? If you say that Donald Trump attended Harvard University, it is not libel, because although it is not true, it is also not damaging. By the same token, if you say that many of Donald Trump's close associates are convicted felons, it is also not libel, because even though it is damaging, or at least it should be, it's also true. Does that make sense? That's libel. Whether or not Dick Cheney is a robot, I don't know. In 2003, this was our first site that was run off of a database. So those old sites that you saw were just huge piles of individual static HTML pages, for those of you who know what that means, and it was getting out of control and very messy. So when we launched this site in 2003, this was driven by a Microsoft Access database. And it was designed by the Houston artist Paul Kramer. And as you can see, we wanted a lot of color. And we introduced the events on the homepage. So those thumbnails at the bottom are events listings. But the basic parts of the website that continue to this day to be featured on the homepage, news section, of course the map, features, were all there at this point. And then this was the first time that we introduced advertising. So that strip you see down the right-hand side of the page or of the screen, those are ads, and they're very tasteful, and we forced people to use our color scheme, and we didn't want it to get yucky, and we thought we were doing such a good job with our advertising because we were selling online advertising, and this was where we got into this world. So, have we ever lost an advertiser because of something that we have published on Glasstire? Yes, many times. But I'm glad to say that many of our core advertisers have not left us. They realize that it is our job to publish things, sometimes that are critical even of their own institutions, and we have enjoyed their support, although advertising has never been more than a third of our budget. We are a nonprofit. In 2007, we launched this site. Again, you can see lots of color. At this point, we had given up on this idea of tasteful advertisements. We wanted to let people do whatever they wanted. And we had a poll, a short-lived poll on the homepage, for those of you who remember this version of the website. And then in 2011, for our 10-year anniversary, we launched the first of what people today would recognize as a content-driven website, where the background is white, the text is black, and the only color comes from ads and images on the site itself. Right when we were about to launch this site, we were hacked. And Glasstire went down for 3 weeks in 2011. And our programmer at the time traced the source of the hack to Russia. This is true. So this is nothing new for those of us in the website business. But we got through that, we got it cleaned up, we got the site launched. I almost had a heart attack because the site was down for 3 weeks. But this was the site in 2011, and then it became this site in, I want to say 2015, I can't remember. And then this is the site as of this morning, which we launched last fall. So we went from having these loud, big new site launches of colorful new site designs to doing it as quietly as possible and just hoping nothing was broken and hoping everything worked. And that's the way the web works nowadays. And the design changes are very incremental, and really all of them are about responding to these things now. So we're all struggling to figure out how to reach people through the ways that they're accessing the web. And we are all struggling to catch up. The advertising business, the publishing business, we're all just trying to keep up with the technology. It is always changing. And I always say that I'm jealous of people who start a new art blog nowadays or a new arts website nowadays, and they don't have this Frankensite of multiple database migrations that we are living with. Because in 18 years, as Andrew mentioned, 37,000 articles and events. We may be over that now, I'm not sure. The number that I'm really proud of here is 400 writers. It's amazing to think that we have published 400 writers. It's actually more than 400. Most of whom were in Texas, many of whom were not, some of whom were not, but most of those writers were in Texas. And the irony of all of this work and all of this 18 years of work and all of these people working on it is that the whole thing fits on about 20 gigabytes. So, Andrew mentioned our videos, our top 5 videos. So here's a pop quiz. Our top 5 most read articles of all time. Would anyone like to hazard a guess what they are? Does anyone wonder? Does anyone, show of hands, who thinks a review made it into the top 5? No. Nobody reads reviews. I'll tell you that right now. All right, so here it is. Our top 5 articles of all time. Number 5, I hope you can read that. And people say Glasstire isn't intellectual. What Nicholas Borio thinks of artists should be reading by Ryder Richards, October 2015, 20,767 views, 3 comments. Number 4, with a title that only Google search engine optimization could love, Psychographic Consumer Profiling by Carrie Marie Schneider, Houston artist, from February 2013. This is the oldest article on our top 5. 22,000 plus views, also 3 comments. Number 3, should artists have to talk about their work? Christina Reese. Whenever Christina Reese, our editor-in-chief, writes about artists suffering, people love it. They eat it up. This was from May 2017, almost 24,000 views, 35 comments. Comments are starting to beef up. Number 4, I wonder if this is the worst time to be an artist in decades, or maybe ever. Christina Reese, December of 2014, topping out at over 38,000 views, 84 comments. Oh, the artists were suffering. And number 1, yes. Please, please, please stop painting the electrical boxes, a public art proposal, which I wrote in July 2017. 93 comments and counting. We had a comment last week on this article. I don't know why this is our most read article. I wrote this in the summer. This was a little throwaway summer piece. You know what these things are. They're all over town. People went crazy. I'm a hater, 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 and they just didn't know what my problem was. This is actually, I actually like this electrical box. I took this picture this weekend. This is the corner of Chimney Rock and Woodway. I like the Trompe l'oeil box. You kind of don't notice it. It's not a brightly colored toucan. Anyway, yeah, that was the most read article on Glasstire of all time. Wow. So, what do we do? Well, we do a lot of things, but one of the main things we do, and one of the things that I think people think about mostly with Glasstire, is that we publish art criticism. And whenever you want to know what something is, it's always good to look at the etymology of that word. So critic, from the Greek, it doesn't mean be grumpy, it doesn't mean create despair, it just means to separate or decide, or from kritikos, able to make judgments. We all make judgments, all of us make judgments, and the difference with critics is that we actually put our judgments out there publicly to be criticized. So it looks kind of something like this. What we do is we take our needle nose of despair and we jam it down into the heads of artists and we suck all their joy of life and will to create out of them. I'm kidding. This is a piece by a Mexican artist named Jorge Ruelas. It's from 1907. It's called The Critic. Mwah. It actually looks something more like this. So, I don't know if you all have seen the movie Ratatouille. If you have not seen the movie Ratatouille, you must see it very soon. It's one of my favorite movies. And one of my favorite things about this wonderful movie is this fearsome restaurant critic, Anton Ego, voiced by Peter O'Toole. And he has the power to close restaurants, and he's terrifying. And over the course of this movie, this character goes through one of the most wonderful character arcs. And at the end, he writes this very, very beautiful restaurant review. And in this restaurant review, he says something about criticism that I love. And I'm paraphrasing, he's talking about food, but we're talking about art. And what he says is that the most mediocre piece of art is more meaningful than any criticism that we can write designating it so. And we always try to keep this in mind at Glasstire because the artists are on the field and we are on the sidelines. The artists are in the game and we are just watching. And the grit and courage that it takes for artists to make work and put it out there for us to judge is something that we never, never, never try to lose sight of, even if we're saying that we think it misses the mark. But Anton Ego says at the end of that review, where art criticism or where criticism is important is in the discovery and defense of the new. And this is where criticism plays a vital role, because the discovery and defense of the new is what this idea of covering this whole state was all about. Because I could see dying on the vine all the art critics at the daily papers all the daily papers when Glasstire was started were there, and now none of them are. None of the dailies have a full-time salaried critic. A.O. Scott is the movie critic for the New York Times, and I love this definition of criticism. The role of critic is to resist the manufactured consensus, interrogate the successful, and exalt the unknown, discovery and defense of the new, and argue for ambiguity and complexity. Things are never clear, things are never just one way or another, there is always shades of gray. It is the only antidote we have to paid publicity. And trust me, I invite you to my email inbox. If you want to read PR and paid publicity all day long, you can do it. I get 75 to 100 PR press releases every single day, and they're not much fun to read. So you'd rather have criticism than PR. So that's A.O. Scott. He's great. This is Bruce Nauman. This is a piece by Bruce Nauman. I like this piece. My husband drew my attention, as it were, to this piece, because what artists do simply, very simply, is draw our attention to some aspect of reality. And what we do as critics is draw your attention to the art. So we are just funneling it through. So over the years, we've developed some rules of the road. As I've been giving this talk elsewhere in Texas, I like to say, this isn't even our biggest highway in Houston. We're so big. Rules of the road. Punch up, not down. Who knows this artist? Who's this artist? Anyone? Anyone? Vincent Valdez, yes. This is from his Boxer series from a few years ago. What do we mean when we say punch up, not down? It means that if there is a space that doesn't do shows necessarily that we think are all that good on a regular basis, we're not going to just out of the blue give them a bad review. Interrogate the successful, discovery and defense of the new. We will punch up. We will look at the bigger spaces or the spaces that are getting a lot of attention or the shows that are getting a lot of attention if we think that they need to be criticized, and that's where we will direct our criticism. Another rule of the road is tell the truth. Does anyone know this painting? It's Grant Wood. It's in the collection of the Amon Carter Museum. George Washington and the famous apple tree or cherry tree story, sorry. I love this painting because it's so weird. I love American primitivism. I love how he's pulling back the cherry fringed curtain onto the scene of the little boy George Washington with the old George Washington face, holding the hatchet. Clearly he's been caught red-handed, as it were. And then if you go a little further back into the painting, the African Americans taking care of the cherry tree. There are many truths going on in this painting. Where it's important for us, or where the ideas are important for us, is that even when it's difficult, we have to tell the truth, and always tell the truth. Related, closely related, be brave. Luis Jimenez, the great Luis Jimenez. I took this picture last week at the Blanton Museum in Austin. This is a piece that the late, great artist Luis Jimenez made. It's called Crossing the Border. In Spanish, it's Cruzando el Rio Bravo. And it's a depiction of his grandfather, the artist's grandfather, carrying his mother and the infant son, their infant son, the artist's father, across the river in 1922 when they came across. And I love this testament to the courage of his family. Without their crossing, we would not ever have had the amazing Luis Jimenez in Texas, one of the greatest artists we've ever had in this state. And that is all I will say about that, but we try always to be brave. Be smart. That's sort of a dumb thing to say, but it's actually something that you have to always keep in mind. Think about the John Baldessari writing hundreds of times, "I will not make any more boring art." You have to remind yourself sometimes that when you put something out there, even if it's an idea that's already out there, to do it in the most original and interesting way always. This is Amber Autumn Night. This is her piece. It was titled Mother, but M space ER. And in this, she was drawing on really commonplace ideas about motherhood and control and food. And she gathered the audience in this tight little circle and spoon-fed people ice cream, black ice cream, which was uncomfortable and weird and kind of wonderful. I loved this piece, and I think her work is very smart. Remember your histories. This is collage work, of course, by Deborah Roberts, an Austin artist, Austin-based artist. I say this because I think she is drawing upon her own histories as a girl, an African-American girl, in a lot of this collage work that she does, but always also drawing upon the history of this type of art making. Of course, Hannah Hawk, the Dadaist, who made these sort of surreal, crazy collages back in the day. Deborah's very much coming out of that tradition. And this work has been making a really big splash lately. I'm sure you all have seen it. I first saw it at Art Palace Gallery here in Houston. And when I say remember your histories in terms of Glasstire, What that really is about is while we're always looking for the new artists and fresh spaces and fresh stories, we also try to remember all the people who have built this art scene that we all enjoy over the decades, the people who have made it what it is, and remember the history of that. Art is everywhere. This is Christie Blizzard. Does anyone know the work of Christie Blizzard? Some people do. She's a San Antonio-based artist now. This was a series where she went to the Today Show and Good Morning America, and she would stand back there holding these weird, ambiguous signs with this kind of mournful expression on her face. And they are so hilarious to me. She's been banned from the set of the Today Show and Good Morning America, apparently. She's not allowed to come back anymore, but I love how she, like so many artists before her, was taking her work out into the world, out of the so-called art world, into the world. We always try to remember at Glasstire to keep our eyes peeled for artists working in unexpected places. This is supposed to be fun. Denis Nance is here tonight in his yellow shirt. This is Denis Nance. If you have never looked at denisnance.com at his costumes that he makes, I strongly recommend that you do so. I don't know about you all, but when I got into the art world, it was supposed to be fun, right? Nobody got into the art world to get rich or to be serious. It was because these people were smart and interesting and doing interesting things, and it's meant to be enjoyable. Sometimes it feels like it's not very fun. And we try never to lose sight of that, and try never to forget the artists who also are not losing sight of that. Art is not church, and I don't mean to pick on, it's funny doing this slide in other cities because they don't necessarily recognize that this is Richmond Hall at the Menil Collection, the Dan Flavin permanent installation. It's very churchy, that's why I picked this picture. Art is not church. Art is not a religion. Religion gives you answers. Art does not give you answers. Science gives you answers. Art does not give you answers. Art does not even ask questions. Art just draws your attention. But I think a lot of people treat the contemporary art world like a type of religion where they wear the proper somber clothes and they make their pilgrimages to the art sites that they are supposed to see, and they repeat the dogma and worship and genuflect at the correct artworks. And again, I don't know about you all, but I didn't get into the art world because I wanted to join a cult of contemporary art, because art is not church. Except when it is. This is Nestor Topch. He did this piece called Eternal Now. It was last year, I think. It was at the chapel at the George H. Lewis Funeral Home. Of course, he is dealing with issues of religion and spirituality and the eternal and the Yves Klein blue and the void. So art is not church except when it is. Things are ambiguous, not always one way or the other. So those are our rules of the road. And the last one is, we are not a monolith. We meaning Glasstire. This one is really more of a message I would love to get out there. First of all, we are quite a small little group of people, a merry band, we few, we happy few. We are maybe deceptively small. I think some people might think that we're a much larger organization than we are. The other part about that is that we publish all kinds of opinions and articles on Glasstire. Many, many, many of those thousands of articles that have been published on Glasstire do not reflect my opinion. I do not agree with them, but we are here and we exist as a platform for people to share their ideas, no matter what they might be. So we try not to have a monolithic point of view, and we try to remind people that sometimes we just can't cover everything. The reason people think we are a monolith, of course, is because we are the media. And when we think about the word media and what the media is these days, I think we all have a very specific idea in our minds about this sort of oppressive, evil, complicated thing that maybe is not on our side politically. But this is another example of etymology being very, very interesting. Does anyone here know the origin of the word media? Anyone? It's very interesting because I had to look this up myself. I didn't know. It's very simple and very innocuous. Media comes from the Latin, from mediare, the place in the middle, or tunica media, the middle sheath or layer. All the media is the thing in the middle, the thing that connects you to the thing that you're learning about or reading about or watching about or listening about. That's all it is. And I really like this idea, and I like to think about us as connective tissue. That's why it's on the site, those words that Andrew read a little while ago. We are the connective tissue. We are just the middle layer between the art and the artists and our audience. The reason people think, again, that media is something maybe that's kind of oppressive these days is because it's not just media, it's internet media. Once again, internet, a 1970s word, again, kind of innocuous. Net, mesh, web. A net can be, you can be caught in the net of the detective if you're the criminal trying to get away, or the net can be the thing that saves you when you're the trapeze artist falling. It's ambiguous and it can mean many things. But the internet does feel quite difficult these days. The idea of that mesh or web or interconnectedness that of course drives so much of the words that we use to describe the internet is that we would go past this one-way technology. Yes, this is the Gutenberg Press, one-way dissemination of ideas. I write the book, you read the book, that's the way it goes, and this thing makes it. And even all the technologies since then, technologies that created a lot of anxiety when they appeared, were all single channel and all, with the exception of the telephone here, one way. So the telegraph is one way, the radio is one way, TV was even one way. Phone, finally we get a two-way but single channel thing. The reason that I think the thing that we carry around in our pocket is called the iPhone and not the iTelegraph or the iRadio is because it is a two-way device. But the idea with the internet is that we would go back before leapfrogging backwards over all of these technologies to this idea, to the forum. This is the Roman Forum in ancient Rome. And this was where you would come to do a little shopping, to get your news, to socialize, to look at things maybe you shouldn't be looking at on the internet or looking at in the world, to engage with society and with your fellow people as a group. And the idea of the internet was that we would come back to this idea like the forum and we would all be there together and all of the conversation and the discourse would be two ways. And I like this idea very much and it feels very satisfying and wholesome in a way. But the fact of the matter is that life on the internet most of the times, for most people, does not feel like some toga party in the Roman Forum. It feels more like this. This is Peter Bruegel the Elder. Obviously, he and Hieronymus Bosch were kind of channeling the same craziness. It's called The Fall of the Rebel Angels. The internet feels crazy and chaotic and untrustworthy and filled with all kinds of awful characters doing awful things. It doesn't feel like an orderly Roman forum or what we might imagine an orderly Roman forum felt like. And there's a reason for this. I've written about this a couple of times, and not only I, but I think everyone and their dog now has written about getting off of Facebook. We all love to write about getting off of Facebook. I finally got off of Facebook for real last year. I did it. It took a couple of tries. And I am here to tell you that my life is much calmer and happier and saner without Facebook. I highly recommend that you get off. And not just Facebook, but all of these technologies. Yes, I do still use Instagram. Yes, I know that it's owned by Facebook. And I know that there are people in here, a person that I might be married to who's able to use Facebook and not be driven crazy by it. But as a former 3-hour-a-day Facebook user, I can tell you that the benefit that I got from using Facebook, which was connection with old friends and the ability to find a plumber easily in Houston, was far outweighed by the negatives of it. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought that I don't want to be using my education and my talents and my thinking to create content for free to line the pockets of somebody's hoodie, A. And B, I don't like the idea of being fed, a feed, the algorithmic feed that feeds you your feed and you are fed like a little baby bird. I have been feeding myself since I was a toddler, and I would like to feed my mind by myself. And look out there for what I want to read and what I want to know about and who I want to connect with and what news sources I want to see without it being designed for me by some clunky algorithm. Remember what I said about taking that awful comment down off of our message boards? Facebook doesn't take those awful comments down. Facebook's whole business model depends on awful comments making people crazy so that people stay on Facebook and spend more time feeling crazy, feeling upset, and reading all those awful things that they leave up there. And yes, there is the First Amendment, and yes, that is a conversation. But in my opinion, well, anyway, you know what my opinion is. It's pretty clear. Of course, there are people who have used social media very, very successfully. And of these two people, at least Kanye has come out with a really good album. But not to pick on people. Yes, there were famous people and there were presidents before social media, but I don't think we would have had President Donald Trump without social media. Not to pick on people whose political views do not align with my own. Who's the most famous art critic in America? Anyone? Yell it out. Anyone? Who's the most? Living or dead? Jerry Saltz. No, living. Yes, Jerry Saltz, ladies and gentlemen. Jerry Saltz. I am envious of Jerry Saltz's cheerful use of social media, the way he is able to promote himself, the way he gets on there and puts himself out there and has from the very beginning. He got social media from the very beginning. And no, I don't ascribe to the Jerry Saltz is a dummy and a bad writer train or school of thought. I like a lot of what he writes, but yes, he is an avid user of social media, which is or is not disturbing depending on your point of view. So, all of this leads me to Michele de Montaigne, obviously. In the 16th century, there was this guy in France, and he wrote these essays. He wrote first-person, discursive, humanist essays about his life and his thoughts. It was what we would recognize today as blogging, the first blogging. And these are the funniest, warmest, most wonderful, life-affirming essays you're ever going to read. I love them. And what's interesting about all of this is in the 16th century, or if you think about the 16th century, because I studied English literature as an undergraduate, when I think about the 16th century in Europe, I think about Shakespeare and the Tudor monarchy and all the great writers in England. I think maybe about all the great art that was being made in Italy and the Netherlands. Maybe I think about Spain and their colonial project in the New World. But you never think about France in the 16th century. We never talk about the French Renaissance. Why is that? Well, there's a reason. And the reason is that France in the 16th century was a complete disaster. It is estimated that in the last 30 years of Michele de Montaigne's life, 3 million people died in armed conflict between Catholics and Protestants in France. And we hear that number and we're like, well, 3 million people. But 3 million people dying in the past 30 years in the United States would be roughly 6 times the number of people who have died of AIDS in the United States. It was a huge number. It was dangerous to travel, weak king, terrible time in France. You get the picture. And yet, you have this guy in Southwest France who is writing these amazing, amazing essays. I've been reading them for the past couple of years. I discovered them actually on a list of books to read in the New York Times by the actress Tilda Swinton. And because I will do anything that Tilda Swinton tells me to do, because she's so cool, I went and got this book. I must have come across this as an undergraduate, but I didn't remember it. And you can dip in and out of these essays. They're so wonderful. And what I have gotten from reading these things and from reading about what France was like at this time over the past couple of years is that it is possible to live a good life even in the midst of a complete shit show. And not only that, it is our job to live a good life, even in the midst of a shit show. And not only that, it is the job of our species to live a good life in the midst of a shit show. Because you know what? The world has always felt crazy and out of control and untrustworthy and dangerous and scary. This painting was not painted recently. It has always felt crazy and out of control for people. Which leads me back to this, and leads me back to what has been so satisfying about doing the work of Glasstire these past 18 years. What has given it so much meaning for me is the network, is the artists and the art and all of these spaces and all of these people and the field work, as I call it, going out on the road, seeing art in Texas. It has been so, so deeply satisfying. and I will miss it. So here we are, roughly in the middle of this landmass. This is where we are, this is where we live, this is where a lot of artists are that we know and love, which leads us to this notion of place, quickly, provincialism. One of the things people do, one of the things we do as a species is not appreciate that which is in our own backyard. We are always looking elsewhere. The grass is always greener. Something elsewhere must be cooler, must be better. The island of Manhattan is a province. It is provincial, just like everywhere else. The percentage of good art in Texas is the same as the percentage of good art in New York or LA or anywhere else in the world. I guarantee it. We should look to where we are and appreciate what is here. That is the project of Glasstire. The other project of Glasstire is to avoid this aspect of the art world. This is from the movie The Big Lebowski. This is David Thewlis. It's Sandra about the Biennale. Yes, the part of the art world that is ridiculous and pretentious and like a bunch of sixth graders clawing to get to the top of the pile of the cool kids. We try to have nothing to do with that. Instead, we try to pay attention to the people here. These are just mostly photos from my phone from the past 18 months or so, a couple of other people in there. This is what has made it all worthwhile for me. It is the people of the Texas art scene and the work that they do. And there is Brandon Zeck in the top right corner with the long hair, which he no longer has long hair. We are not doing a national search for the publisher. We actually have announced that we have a new publisher, and that person is Brandon Zeck. And he's here today. Yes, he's here in the audience. He's right there wearing the glasses. So please say hello to Brandon after the talk. I have loved doing what I've been doing these past 18 years. As for me, I am stepping down. People have been asking me, what am I going to do? I love this quote from the Texas writer Dave Hickey. Beauty is and always will be blue skies and open highway. What I'm going to be doing is potentially working on some book editing projects for other people that have come up, possibly, and also trying to write my own book. It is terrifying for me to admit this, but I am trying to be brave, as I said. And I'm planning to write a book. And then I am looking for the next big challenge, whatever that may be. So I always end saying, we pay. Do you write? Do you make videos? Do you make podcasts? Do you have something to say? Please write for us. Please get in touch. This is Christina Reese's email, editor@glasstire.com. Bother her. Let her know. We are always, always, always looking for new contributors. Don't be shy. Oh, and speaking of Brandon, we are currently hiring a news editor to replace Brandon in that role. We are looking actively right now. If you know anybody who might be good, this is a full-time job. You're traveling around Texas. You're writing news every day. It's a really, really fun job. It's a great job for the right person. So we're looking. Please pass the word along. Thank you again for coming. Thank you very much, University of Houston. Go see some art. Does anyone have any questions? Are there any questions in the audience? Robert Boyd, yes.
37,000 articles
and events.
No book collection.
No book collection. You mean why haven't we published in print?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you've published in print. You know what it's like.
Yeah. Book editor for 15 years.
You're a book, yeah. We have talked about, I'm stepping down from Glasstire, but I think for our 20th anniversary, this would be a really good project for somebody to do a book of Glasstire. We've talked about doing a book in the past, and we've never done a book, mostly because books are incredibly expensive. You have to raise money to do them. And it is like a whole second job on top of what we do. But someday, I think probably there will be a Glasstire book, if I had to guess. I'm stepping down. Somebody will do it, hopefully. It lives online, and I was in the print business before Glasstire. So producing all that dead tree material, the expense of distributing it was something we never really thought seriously about getting into. But we have thought about doing a book, yes. Do you want us to do a book? Would you buy it?
I would. Of course I would.
We've thought about it. Anyone else? Any other questions? Yes.
Rainey, how do you keep the archive for Glasstire? Especially when there's some sort of internet archaeology in a sense, doing some of the screenshots, the Wayback Machine. I'm certain you've been keeping tabs on this.
Yes. Yes. So this is a very, very interesting question. We're actually in the middle of a technology project that's just in part working on this very issue. I mentioned the word Frankensite. It is a Frankensite. If you imagine all these static HTML pages that weren't connected by a database that weren't searchable, getting all those into the first database, and then these horrible database migrations over the years before people really understood how to do that. The answer is that we have old archival material that isn't formatted correctly, that doesn't necessarily display correctly on the front end of the site. The good news is we have everything. It fits on a little drive. It's not huge volumes of material. It's not boxes and boxes of material. But yes, there is an archaeological aspect to it. That is the perfect world of digging down into some of the stuff and finding these old things. When I put together those screenshots, I used the Wayback Machine. I actually used it to get the HTML code, and then I manually dropped in the pictures to kind of recreate these web pages because they don't exist anymore. Yes, web archival issues is a big issue. Yes?
In all your time working on Glasstire, what do you consider your greatest accomplishment?
Somebody asked me this. The main thing really is keeping it going. There were many times when I wanted to quit, really, really wanted to quit, and questioned what I was doing with my life and what was this crazy thing about. And it was so hard and such a struggle. So I'm glad I didn't quit. I'm glad it's going, and I'm glad now that it's at a place where I feel absolutely confident stepping down, and it is robust, and it's going to continue without me and get bigger and better, I hope, and change and become something different. So really, honestly, it's a boring answer, but I'm most proud of keeping it going, really. Yes?
As you've traveled around the state, what are some of the really more memorable experiences that you've had?
That I can tell you? Oh gosh. The main thing, the thing that I've always loved was the travel and going around and meeting people, and that was the most fun. That's the fun part about Glasstire. Making sure everyone gets paid and the grants get written and the galas get organized is not the fun part. The fun part is going around and looking at art. And so getting to see these spaces, these short-lived little butterfly spaces that would come and go over the years. And of that venue list, I think we had like 2,700 venues that we've covered. Many, many, many of those don't even exist anymore. So there would be these ephemeral moments where I would be in Lubbock or Austin or wherever, going to these spaces, going to artists' houses or storage units or whatever they were doing and seeing what they were up to. And always hoping for that rare experience of seeing truly great art. It's very rare. Mostly you get disappointed, just like you get disappointed in Chelsea when you're looking, for good art in New York. But I think that would be the thing, going out and meeting people out in the field. That's the joy of it. Anyone else? Yes.
Have you intervened in the past when you felt that a writer is either being too flowery or too mean-spirited in their review?
Oh, yes. I don't edit much of the writing anymore. In fact, I really don't edit anymore. Christina and other people do the editing. But back when I was doing the editing, I was what you might describe as an invasive editor. I would definitely get in there and try and fix people for better or for worse. The main problem that we have usually isn't that people are too mean. The main problem that we have is that people are too afraid to be opinionated, and all they do is describe the art. We could have published double the number of articles that you just saw if we were willing to just publish descriptions of art and descriptions of shows, because those are very easy and painless to write. What we want is for people to have an opinion and to say something and to come down one way or another. At one point, we got a lot of feedback that Glasstire was too negative, and so we did a study, and we looked at our reviews from the previous 3 years, and we found that in the previous 3 years, for every 10 reviews that we had published, 1 was negative, 3 were like ambiguous or neutral, and 6 were positive. But people only remember the negative review. So what can you do? But yes, I do interviewing. Yes?
Have you ever been approached by other states or other regions around the country about the model that you created here?
Well, we tried to do Glasstire in Southern California at one point. And I just wasn't able to get the funding together to have a full-time editor there, a kind of Rainey on the ground to get it started as I had gotten the Texas site up. It would work elsewhere. I think there are places that are similar where there's a geographic region with some major urban centers. Southern California would be one, Ohio would be one. There are other places, and there are publications like Big Red and Shiny out of Boston, Burnaway, which is based in Atlanta. So there are other similar kinds of publications out there. But it really is a labor of love at a certain point, and getting it up and running is a labor of love. So most people just don't want to fool with it, or they give up. We've seen a lot of publications come and go, a lot of print publications, a lot of online publications get started up, and we're like, yay, we're not going to be the only one publishing criticism, and then they stop because it's hard. Yes, Mr. Addix.
For me, I found that first, E-A-R-T-H without R, A-R-T, is just E-H, A.
Eh.
The first without R is just A.
I agree completely. Yes.
It was just a comment, because when you said that the most read articles of all time, just really wanted to commend you, because you really changed the outcome through your investigative journalism and the stance you took. And when Ed Wilson got the commission at George R. Brown, that was the stance that was taken, and that really changed the outcome for one particular artist, and it's changed the feeling for the art community standing up. And I see John here is such a great supporter, but it was a very important time where artists felt pushed down, and you gave the voice, and that's a journalistic achievement to make it change an outcome of the situation.
Well, thank you. One of the reasons we've always decided to go ahead and keep comments, however troubling they may be, and also to allow people to post anonymously, even though personally I don't approve of that and I don't do it myself, is because we wanted artists to have a platform. And yes, mostly it isn't artists, having a platform and having a say, but the art world is built on the backs of artists, and they often are the voiceless, and they often are the ones who benefit the least. And so we are always going to come down on the side of artists and always going to try to support them whenever we can. And when Ed Wilson reached out to me and said, please help me, we said, absolutely, of course. And Bill Davenport did all that research, all that investigating on that particular episode. So thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
You did an interview last month, and you said we're drowning in competent art.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, in your 18 years, what has been your antidote to just that, to drowning in competent art?
Drowning in competent art.
Or is that why you're leaving now?
I do think we're drowning in competent art. I do think that one of the changes that I've seen in doing Glasstire is how much the Texas art scene has grown, how much the Houston art scene has grown. When I was doing Canvas back in the day, you really could encompass the whole of the Houston art scene and know everything that was going on. And that's very hard to do now. It's grown and it's balkanized as a result. And that's true in Texas as well. And art schools are putting out more artists and all these things that people like to talk about. And there's more and more and more and more. Art fairs have driven that as well. And I think that, yes, I think there's a lot of competent art. I call it competent, meaning it's not bad, it's perfectly fine, but it's not setting the world on fire or pushing the ball forward or something that I go like, wow, that's amazing. Those moments when you say, wow, that's amazing, they are rare. They've always been rare. And The retreat that I'm always tempted to go to, which I try to resist, is to go to museums and just look at old art because it's been vetted, and usually the quality is going to be higher just on average. But if you do that, you're not paying attention to the artists who are living and breathing and working. And the thing about old art is whatever the concerns of that artist who made that art that really resonated at that time with their audience don't resonate in the same way with us. We don't see it the way people saw it. So you have to get out there. You have to look at art being made by people today. But yes, it can be a fire hose of competency. That's true. Anyone else? Okay, thank you all so much for coming.